Nobody at Ferrari expected this to happen so quickly. The first Friday of the season in Australia should have simply been the beginning of Lewis Hamilton's adaptation to his new team, but what happened on the track began to generate glances inside the Ferrari garage itself. Subscribe to continue uploading more of this type of content now, if we continue. Because while everyone expected Charles Leclerc to continue being the team's clear reference, the data began to tell a different story. Hamilton wasn't just around. He was starting to match and even beat some internal records from his first weekend with the car. And the most surprising thing of all is that neither Frédéric Vasseur nor Leclerc himself expected the process to be so fast. What happened in those first Australian Grand Prix practices could be the first sign of something much bigger within Ferrari. The first Friday of the Australian Grand Prix always has a special meaning within Formula One. It is the moment when all the preseason theories begin to face the reality of the track, when the teams can finally compare their work during the winter with that of their rivals. But in the case of Ferrari, this Friday also had an additional ingredient that captured all the attention of the paddock: the official start of Lewis Hamilton's time with the Italian team. The arrival of the seven-time world champion to Ferrari had been one of the most shocking movements in recent years in Formula One. For months, there was talk of the enormous challenge that this change represented, not only because of the historical weight of the team, but also because of the need to adapt to a completely different car than the one Hamilton had driven for so long at Mercedes. Changing teams in Formula One does not only mean changing colors, it means understanding a different technical philosophy, a different approach to car setup, and a new relationship with the engineers who interpret every driver's feedback. For that reason, within Ferrari, there was a fairly clear expectation about how this first weekend should develop. The main objective was not to dominate from day one, but to begin the integration process between Hamilton and the team. It was expected that the Briton would need time to understand the behavior of the car, especially in delicate aspects such as the management of aerodynamic balance, the sensitivity of the car under braking, and the way in which the Ferrari responded in high-speed corners. Meanwhile, the team's internal reference continued to be Charles Leclerc. The Monégasque driver had been the point of comparison within Ferrari for years, the man who knew the characteristics of the car better than anyone, and the driver around whom many of the team's configurations had been built in recent seasons. It was logical to think that, at least during the first races, Hamilton would have to take the pace of his new teammate as a direct reference. With that context, the first free practice session began in Albert Park. From the beginning, Ferrari showed positive signs. The car looked competitive, and both drivers started setting solid times from first runs. However, what began to attract attention inside the garage was not only the general performance of the car, but the way in which Hamilton was riding from his first laps that I end free practice one. Charles Leclerc recorded the best time of the session with a lap of 1 minute and 20.267 seconds, placing Ferrari at the top of the table. Hamilton finished very close, completing a solid result for the team, with a 1-2 that confirmed the good feelings that had already appeared during the preseason. At first glance, that simply seemed like a promising start for the Italian team. But within the team, the engineers began to observe something that did not quite fit with the expected script. Hamilton wasn't driving like someone who was still trying to understand the car. His laps were clean, consistent, and increasingly closer to the team's internal references. For many within Ferrari, the Briton must have needed several sessions to begin to feel comfortable with the car, but the initial data began to indicate that this process could be much faster than expected. The situation became even more interesting when the second training session of the day arrived. In free practice 2, other teams began to show their true pace, especially those powered by Mercedes engines, with several drivers placing themselves at the top of the timesheets. Ferrari was no longer as clearly dominant as in the first session, but was still firmly among the most competitive teams of the day. And it was precisely at that moment when the data appeared that began to generate conversations within the team. In various simulation programs, both on fast laps and longer runs, Hamilton ended up recording slightly better times than Leclerc. The difference was not huge, but the context changed everything. It was just Hamilton's first Friday as an official Ferrari driver. For Charles Leclerc, this was particularly striking. The Monégasque was used to being the internal reference point, the driver who set the team's pace during qualifying sessions and often also in long runs. Seeing Hamilton approach that level so quickly, and even surpass it at some points in the testing program, was something that no one within Ferrari expected to see so soon. But perhaps the most telling sign wasn't just in lap times. Telemetry analysis showed that Hamilton was beginning to replicate some of the key points of Leclerc's driving style with great accuracy. The braking zones, for example, were one of the aspects where it was thought that the Briton would need more time to adapt. However, the data showed that he was converging very quickly with the team's internal benchmarks, something that normally only happens when a driver starts to feel really comfortable with the car. That detail was precisely what began to generate surprise both on the Ferrari wall and in the team's own garage. It wasn't just about a good time on the board. What they were seeing was a driver who, from day one, seemed to understand the car much faster than anyone had anticipated. And if that trend continued for the rest of the weekend, Ferrari could find itself with a very interesting situation within its own team. Because the driver who had arrived to start a new stage in his career could be ready to compete at the highest level much sooner than everyone imagined. As Friday progressed at Albert Park, what at first seemed like simply a good start to the weekend for Ferrari began to transform into something much more interesting within the team. Time sheets might show a partial picture of what was happening on the track, but Ferrari engineers were looking at something much deeper. The data coming directly from the car's telemetry.in Formula 1. Lap times tell only part of the story. The truly important thing is in the small details that appear when each of the sectors of the circuit, each braking point, each acceleration at the exit of the curve, are analyzed. And precisely in this data is where signs that attracted attention began to appear inside the Ferrari garage. Lewis Hamilton was not riding like a driver who is still in the adaptation phase. His laps showed very high consistency, with very few steering corrections, and with a precision that normally only appears when a driver has already perfectly understood the car's behavior. That kind of track stability usually takes several sessions to appear, especially when a driver joins a completely new team. The engineers began to compare their data directly with that of Charles Leclerc, something that has always been a very clear reference within the team. For years, the Monegasque driver had been the point of comparison at Ferrari, the man who best knew the car's reactions, and the one who set the team's internal pace in many of the important sessions. However, on this Friday in Australia, the differences between both drivers began to reduce surprisingly quickly. In several sectors of the circuit, Hamilton was replicating practically the same braking references as Leclerc. At other points on the track, he was even finding small advantages on corner exit, something that indicated that he was understanding how to manage the Ferrari's traction in low fuel load conditions. The data showed a very clear convergence between both drivers, something that normally requires several races to occur. These types of details are exactly what team managers look at most closely during the first sessions of the season. It's not just about seeing who leads the timetable, but about understanding which driver is managing to adapt faster to the real behavior of the car. And in this case, Hamilton's progress was occurring at a speed that even within Ferrari was beginning to raise eyebrows. Frédéric Vasseur, team leader, has always been a figure known for remaining calm in these types of situations. Throughout his career, he has repeated on numerous occasions that the first sessions of a weekend should not be interpreted in an exaggerated way. Fuel loads, test schedules, and engine modes can completely alter the image the timing tables give. But even with that usual caution, what Ferrari was seeing on the track was difficult to ignore. Hamilton was finding rhythm very quickly. And most important of all was the way he was doing it. This was not a particularly fast, isolated lap. What was striking was the constant repetition of competitive laps, something that indicated that the British driver was beginning to understand the real limits of the car. What Hamilton was showing on track didn't seem to be just a good one-off session. The data indicated something deeper, a technical adaptation that was advancing at an unusual speed. Normally, when a driver changes teams, the adaptation process is divided into several phases. First comes the basic understanding of the car, then familiarization with the team's procedures, and finally the moment when the driver begins to extract the full potential of the car. That process can take several races, sometimes even several months. But in Australia, Ferrari was beginning to see signs that Hamilton was moving much faster down that path. Comparisons between both drivers showed that the Briton was not only replicating Leclerc's references in many areas of the circuit, but was also building his own approach to squeeze the performance out of the car. That's extremely important within a Formula One team. When two drivers manage to achieve a similar level of performance, but using slightly different driving styles, the engineers gain a huge amount of valuable information. Each lap becomes a development laboratory where different ways of extracting speed from the same car can be analyzed. What started as a simple Friday practice in Australia could end up being the first sign of something much bigger for Ferrari in this new stage of Formula One. Subscribe to continue uploading more of that content. Now you really think about all this.